They seemed like the perfect family, wealthy, successful, and admired by all. Richard Calloway, a self-made tech millionaire, lived in a sprawling estate in the heart of California. His wife, Vanessa, was elegant and poised, and their daughter, Layla, was the picture of innocence. To the outside world, they were the embodiment of success, happy, healthy, and untouchable. A family that had it all. But one horrifying secret turned their dream life into a nightmare. How does a man who seemingly has everything lose it all in the most grotesque way? What happens when a hidden darkness comes to light, revealing the most chilling of truths? Richard Calloway was not the man he appeared to be. And the horrors that were unfolding behind closed doors would ultimately lead to a shocking and brutal ending. Before we dive into this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more tales of betrayal, secrets, and terrifying truths. Richard Calloway's story began like many American success tales. He was a self-made millionaire, a tech entrepreneur from San Diego who had worked tirelessly to build an empire. From humble beginnings, Richard rose to prominence in the tech world, becoming a celebrated figure known not only for his business acumen but also for his extensive philanthropic efforts. He was the kind of man who gave generously to charities, supported local causes, and always had a polished smile when he appeared at public events. His success had earned him admiration from peers and the public alike, and his reputation was that of a man who had everything: wealth, influence, and the perfect family. The Calloway family, from the outside, seemed like the quintessential picture of success. Their lavish lifestyle included a sprawling estate in the prestigious area of La Jolla, California, where they lived in a home that looked more like a mansion than a family residence. They were regulars at high-profile events, rubbing elbows with celebrities, politicians, and other elite figures. Richard's wife, Vanessa, was the image of sophistication, often seen beside him in photos, smiling gracefully as the perfect partner to his business endeavors. Their daughter, Layla, just 12 years old, was the epitome of innocence, a sweet, smart child who seemed destined for greatness in her own right. Together, the Calloways appeared to have everything anyone could want. In the public eye, Richard was the devoted father, a successful businessman, and a loving husband. He took pride in his family, frequently sharing moments of affection with Layla and Vanessa in interviews and on social media. Their relationship appeared to be built on mutual respect and admiration. To their millions of followers, they were the ideal American family, rich, influential, and flawless. No one could have imagined that behind the facade of perfection, a dark secret was lurking, one that would eventually tear their world apart. Beneath the surface of their picture-perfect life, Richard Calloway harbored a darkness that few could have imagined. For years, he carefully manipulated and groomed his daughter, Layla, subjecting her to a slow, twisted process of control. What began as subtle, seemingly innocent affection gradually escalated into disturbing acts of abuse. As Layla grew older, the nature of Richard's behavior became more sinister, but his ability to mask it behind a facade of normalcy allowed him to maintain his perfect image as a devoted father. Richard's manipulation extended far beyond his daughter. He was a master at controlling the narrative of his life, carefully curating his public persona as a loving, successful family man. His actions, hidden from the public eye, were a calculated effort to ensure that his dark side remained concealed. He kept his wife, Vanessa, completely in the dark, expertly deceiving her into believing that their family was the picture of harmony. Vanessa, focused on the outward appearances of wealth and success, had no idea what was truly happening behind closed doors. Layla, increasingly isolated and emotionally scarred, struggled to cope with the weight of the abuse. She kept her pain hidden from the world, afraid of the consequences of speaking out. The pressure of living in a gilded cage was suffocating, and as she grew older, the damage to her mental and emotional well-being became more profound. Yet, through it all, Richard remained in control, terrorizing his daughter while maintaining the illusion of the perfect father. The family's image, rich, loving, and flawless, was more important to Richard than anything, including the truth. Meanwhile, Vanessa, absorbed in her role as the wife of a successful businessman, remained oblivious to the sinister reality unfolding in her own home. She focused on maintaining the family's outward perfection, attending social events, and keeping up appearances, unaware of the pain her daughter was enduring. Richard had become so skilled at concealing his true nature that he was able to fool not only his wife but also the world. For years, his dark secret remained hidden, his life an intricate web of lies designed to protect his reputation at all costs. The strain of this silence weighed heavily on Layla, but Richard, terrified of losing everything, was determined to maintain the perfect family image, no matter the cost. The revelation that would shatter the Calloway family came slowly, unfolding in ways that Vanessa could never have imagined. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible signs: Layla's unexplained weight gain, her constant nausea, and her reluctance to be touched. But what truly struck Vanessa was the emotional distance that had grown between her and her daughter. Layla seemed withdrawn, increasingly distant, and visibly uncomfortable in her own skin. Despite her suspicions, Vanessa tried to reassure herself, attributing the changes to early puberty or stress. But something felt wrong. One evening, as she entered the bathroom to find her daughter curled on the floor in agony, clutching her stomach, Vanessa's denial began to crack. Layla was bleeding profusely, a sight that was far from normal. Terrified, Vanessa rushed her to the hospital, her mind racing with dread. The diagnosis was a cold, harsh slap of reality: Layla was 3 months pregnant. Vanessa's world crumbled in that moment. A mother's worst nightmare had come true, and it was a nightmare far beyond anything she could have imagined. The shock of the news left Vanessa reeling. Her mind refused to accept what it was telling her. This couldn't be happening. How could her daughter, her sweet child, be carrying a child of her own? And who could have done this to her? The devastating blow came when the DNA results came back. The fetus was a 99.9% match to Richard, her husband, the man she had trusted and loved for years. The truth was undeniable, and it was more horrifying than anything she had ever feared. Richard, the man she had built a life with, the father of her child, was not the man she thought he was. He was a predator. Vanessa's mind refused to process the truth at first. She replayed the memories of their life together, every loving gesture, every perfect family moment, now tainted by the horrifying truth. The man she had trusted, who had presented himself as a devoted father, was a monster hiding in plain sight. The years of abuse Richard had inflicted on their daughter were now exposed, and the anger and disbelief began to consume her. How could she not have seen it? How could she have been so blind? The betrayal was too much to bear. It wasn't just the betrayal of a husband, but the betrayal of a father to his daughter, and that cut deeper than anything Vanessa could ever have imagined. The love she thought she shared with Richard, the family they had built, was a lie. She was living a nightmare, and the truth was beyond anything she could have ever prepared for. Vanessa couldn't hold back any longer. The weight of the truth pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with each passing second. She waited for Richard to come home that night, her hands trembling as she held the DNA test results. The house was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. When he finally walked through the door, his usual confident, almost smug demeanor seemed to mock her in that moment. But there would be no pleasantries, no smiles this time. With cold precision, Vanessa handed him the test results. She didn't need to say anything. The evidence was right there in front of him. "Tell me this isn't true," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though the words could somehow unmake the horror of what she had learned. Richard's reaction was not what Vanessa had anticipated. He didn't flinch, didn't express any remorse. Instead, he took a breath, glanced at the papers, and then, almost dismissively, said, "We need to handle this the right way." His words sent a chill through Vanessa. What did he mean by, handle it? He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't afraid. His indifference only confirmed what she had feared for so long: he wasn't just a man who had made a terrible mistake. He was a psychopath, a man willing to do whatever it took to maintain his power, to protect his image, and to avoid any consequences for his twisted actions. He suggested they quietly remove the child, put the whole thing behind them, and pretend it had never happened. His tone was calm, almost clinical, as if he was discussing a business transaction, not the brutal, unimaginable reality of what he had done to their daughter. It was in that moment that something inside Vanessa snapped. All the years of denial, all the times she had convinced herself that everything was fine, and all the pain of betrayal and fear, everything came crashing down in an instant. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had not only destroyed their family, but had shattered her sense of safety and trust in the world. The rage that had been building for so long erupted without warning. Fueled by years of emotional torment, anger, and the overwhelming desire to protect her daughter, Vanessa attacked. At 1:23 a.m., the security cameras captured Vanessa moving quietly through the mansion in her silk robe, her steps calculated, her expression unreadable. In her hand, she gripped the butcher knife, its cold steel gleaming in the dim light of the hallway. She lunged at Richard, stabbing him repeatedly, each blow a release of the pain, the fear, and the disbelief she had been carrying all this time. Richard's face contorted with surprise, then shock, as the knife plunged into his chest. The room filled with the sounds of his strangled gasps, but Vanessa didn't stop. Her anger was a tidal wave, sweeping away any remnants of the life they had shared. She stabbed him again and again, 47 times in total, until his body lay lifeless beneath her. The room was soaked in blood, the crimson staining her hands, her clothes, the walls. But Vanessa didn't feel relief. She didn't feel satisfaction. She simply sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the lifeless body of the man who had broken her, broken them all. In the silence that followed, a sense of numbness settled over her. The storm of emotions had passed, but now there was only the stark reality of what she had just done. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Vanessa didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply waited. She had done what needed to be done. There was no escape from the nightmare now, but at least it was over. When the news of Richard Calloway's brutal murder broke, it sent shockwaves through California, shaking the very core of the community that had admired his success and the image of his perfect family. The story quickly spread across the internet, where it spread like wildfire, tearing apart the carefully crafted public persona that Richard and his family had built. The Calloways, once revered as the epitome of wealth, power, and family values, were now thrust into the limelight for all the wrong reasons. The media frenzy was immediate and unrelenting. News outlets, social media platforms, and online forums buzzed with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. The headlines were everywhere: tech mogul murdered by wife, a family's darkest secret uncovered, Vanessa Calloway stabs husband to death. The once glamorous images of Richard and Vanessa graced tabloids, but now they were seen through a dark lens, no longer symbols of success, but victims and perpetrators in a twisted tale of betrayal, abuse, and violence. Public reactions were polarized. Some expressed sympathy for Vanessa, acknowledging the years of emotional torment she must have endured while living in the shadow of Richard's sinister secrets. They viewed her actions as those of a woman pushed to the brink, forced to confront a truth so horrific that it could not be ignored. For them, the tragedy was not just the murder itself, but the revelation that such abuse could occur behind the closed doors of a seemingly perfect family. Others, however, could not reconcile the brutal act with their perception of Vanessa. The sheer violence of the murder, the relentless stabbing, the blood-soaked aftermath, left many questioning her motives. Was she a victim of a lifetime of abuse, or had she crossed a line, becoming something monstrous in her own right? Couldn't she have taken a different path, sought help, or found another way to protect her daughter? The debate raged across social media, with people asking if Vanessa was justified in her rage or whether she acted out of revenge, her actions more premeditated than a mere reaction to her husband's betrayal. In the weeks following the murder, investigators uncovered a key piece of evidence: voice recordings from the night of the crime. These recordings, captured by an emergency app on Vanessa's phone, revealed the heart-wrenching moments leading up to Richard's death. The argument between the couple was raw and emotional, a chaotic exchange between a wife in denial and a man who had already accepted his twisted reality. Vanessa's voice shook with disbelief, anger, and desperation as she confronted Richard with the DNA test results. Richard, in turn, remained eerily calm, his words calculated, dismissing the weight of his crimes as if they could be fixed or erased with silence. The recordings painted a picture of a woman pushed to the edge by years of manipulation, betrayal, and fear. As the investigation continued, public opinion remained divided. Some viewed Vanessa as a tragic victim, pushed too far by the man she loved and trusted. They believed she acted out of self-defense and maternal instinct, trying to protect her daughter from the monster she had just discovered was her father. Others, however, questioned whether the violence was the only way out. Had Vanessa been unable to separate her need for vengeance from her desire to protect her family? The case sparked a larger, more profound conversation about domestic abuse, secrecy, and the toll that years of emotional and physical trauma could take on a person. Was Vanessa justified in her actions, or did she cross a line that could never be uncrossed? The public debate raged on, with some defending her as a grieving mother pushed to the edge, while others wondered whether she could have found a way to protect herself and her daughter without resorting to such extreme violence. For the Calloways, the tragic event marked the end of an era, their carefully constructed facade of perfection now shattered beyond repair. And for Vanessa, the firestorm was just beginning. The world would now be watching, waiting to see how the legal system would respond to her brutal act of vengeance, and whether she would ever find peace after her horrifying truth had come to light. As the investigation into Richard Calloway's death unfolded, authorities began to piece together the full extent of the horror that had occurred behind the walls of the Calloway estate. What they uncovered was chilling. Richard was not just a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist, but also a manipulative, psychopathic predator who had been hiding in plain sight. His years of emotional and physical abuse were far more extensive than anyone could have imagined, including his family. Investigators found evidence of Richard's calculated behavior, his manipulation of both Vanessa and Layla, and the depths to which he had twisted their lives for his own sickening gratification. The more they uncovered, the more the portrait of the man they had all admired began to fade. Richard had been able to maintain his perfect image through lies, control, and threats, carefully concealing his monstrous behavior behind a public persona that no one questioned. As the truth emerged, the authorities' focus shifted to Vanessa's actions. Was she justified in killing her husband, or had she crossed a line? The investigation raised several critical questions about her mental state. Had the years of abuse driven her to a breaking point where she no longer saw any way out? Was her violent act one of self-defense, fueled by a desperate need to protect herself and her daughter from further harm? Or was it the result of a long-simmering rage, one that had been building for years? The investigation also explored the role of societal expectations in shaping Vanessa's decisions. As a woman living in a relationship defined by control and fear, had she been conditioned to accept her husband's behavior? And when faced with the reality of his abuse, did she feel as though the law would fail to protect her, and therefore took justice into her own hands? These questions weighed heavily on the minds of those involved in the case. The trial that followed was nothing short of a public spectacle. News outlets covered every detail, and the case became a national sensation. On one side, supporters of Vanessa painted her as a victim of years of abuse, forced to act in a moment of desperation to protect herself and her daughter. They argued that the system had failed her, leaving her no choice but to take matters into her own hands. On the other side, critics accused Vanessa of acting in cold blood, taking her husband's life without regard for the law. Was it really an act of self-defense, or had she allowed her emotions to drive her to murder? The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, and the public was divided. As the trial continued, the emotional toll on everyone involved became evident. Layla, still recovering from the trauma of what had happened, was forced to confront the reality of her father's abuse. She had never shared her experience with anyone until now, and her testimony, though courageous, was heart-wrenching. She revealed the depth of the manipulation and the pain she had endured at Richard's hands. Yet, her words were not enough to change the course of the trial. In the end, the jury returned their verdict: Vanessa was convicted of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. The decision left the public polarized. Some felt justice had been served. Richard, a man who had caused so much harm, was finally gone. But for others, the verdict was a tragic reminder of how broken the system was. Vanessa had been forced to kill the man she once loved because the system had failed to protect her and her daughter. As she was led away in handcuffs, many wondered whether Vanessa would ever find peace. She had become a symbol of a broken system, one that had failed to protect those who needed it most. For some, she was a victim who had been pushed too far. For others, she was a criminal who had taken matters into her own hands. But one thing was clear: the case had sparked a nationwide conversation about abuse, the lengths people would go to escape it, and the justice, or lack thereof, that would follow. In the wake of the brutal murder and Vanessa's conviction, the family's dark secrets continued to unravel, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The most heartbreaking aspect of this tragedy was Layla, whose life had already been shattered by years of abuse. Although Layla's pregnancy had been the catalyst for the horrifying events, the trauma she experienced didn't end with the murder of her father. The emotional and physical toll of her ordeal was too much for her young body to bear. Despite her initial hopes of carrying the child, the stress, medical complications, and emotional strain led to a miscarriage at 5 months. Layla's grief and trauma were compounded by the loss of what had already been stolen from her: her innocence, her sense of safety, and her family. Her whereabouts remained shrouded in mystery. Some say Layla fled to another country, seeking solace and anonymity far away from the eyes of the public and the haunting memories of her past. Others believe she retreated into a mental institution, her mind broken by the unspeakable horrors she had endured, unable to recover from the years of abuse and the chaos that followed. What remains undeniable is that the nightmare endured by the Calloway family was far from unique. Richard Calloway, with his wealth, power, and status, had been able to conceal his predatory nature for years, using his influence to protect himself from the truth. His story is not an isolated case. There are many more men like him, men who hide behind their wealth, their position in society, and the systems that are designed to protect them. These systems often fail to recognize the signs of abuse, and the victims continue to suffer in silence, trapped in situations they feel powerless to escape. As the dust settles, the real question that lingers is how many more victims there are out there, living in fear, unable to break free from the powerful forces that protect the abusers. And how long will it take for society to truly address the problem and see the truth before more lives are destroyed? The tragic tale of Richard Calloway and his family serves as a devastating reminder of how deeply hidden secrets can destroy lives. What appeared to be a picture-perfect family, complete with wealth, success, and admiration, was in reality a facade masking a horrific truth. The story of Richard's abuse and the unimaginable betrayal he inflicted on his daughter Layla, and the lengths to which Vanessa, his wife, went to protect her, leaves us grappling with the consequences of silence and denial. Richard Calloway wasn't just a monster in the eyes of the public, he was a monster who lived within the walls of a family that thought they were untouchable. He had manipulated, controlled, and hidden behind his wealth and power for years, and ultimately, his actions cost him his life. But it wasn't just his life that was destroyed. Layla's innocence was stolen, and Vanessa's life was forever altered as she was forced to confront an impossible choice. The question remains, could this tragedy have been avoided if Richard's secret had been uncovered sooner? Was Vanessa justified in her actions, or was there another way out of the nightmare that didn't end in violence? This case leaves us questioning not only the fragility of family dynamics but also the lengths to which people will go to conceal their darkest truths. How often do we look the other way, blinded by what we think we know, and how many more families are out there hiding their own secrets? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more disturbing cases that uncover the darkest sides of love, lies, and betrayal.